What a guy. Wonderful. Well, it's great to be with everyone. We're going to get right into it today because we have a special guest, Brewster Kahle, as well as Sutton, who will be with us in a little bit. I'm going to do a brief run through of where we are in kernel before handing it over to Andy, who's going to get us well into conversation about libraries, archives, this internet that we've been exploring on for a few weeks thus far, and of course, much longer as technologists and users. We've already gotten to show Brewster this slide, so I'm gonna keep it brief and just Brewster, what I hope you know is you have a group around you that's really grateful to spend time with you. They're all wonderful in their own ways, and I expect an engaged, enjoyable hour with you, and we're really, really grateful to have you. We're in a particular part in kernel where things slow down a little bit. This module, Take Back the Web, is one where we explore our stated goals are exploring the internet and our intentions and how those two things interact. And luckily for, I know many of the kernel fellows, I think it's been a little bit quieter this week. I think it's been a little bit slower, and we expect it to remain that way for weeks 3, which is where we are now, week 4, week 5, with a bit of an upswing in energy going into week 6 and 7. We'll have a celebration to end the block that we'll start to prepare for as week 5 turns to 6, and definitely as 6 turns to 7. We expect, there'll be at least 45 adventures that present during that week, and then we'll do a proper send-off celebration in that week 7. So enjoy the quiet time is I think what I'm getting at, because we eventually will ask of you to help us pick up the pace for a wonderful ending. But this is the time, if you have an adventure that you're focusing on or something that you want to like really go deep on, it will be quieter, right? The first Fireside, when Vitalik was here, maybe there was 180 people on the call. Right now there's 60 on the Fireside, and I expect the number maybe will go up, but you'll have a little bit more space to meander, and we are grateful for that. And so, yeah, I think that's really all I have. There's no like thing to do. I'll just pass the mic to Andy to try to set the stage of where we are in the syllabus and move us towards conversation.
Thank you so much. So this is the last of the backward-facing modules in kernel before we get to week 4 and beyond. It means it's the end of the spiral in this particular direction. And we are deeply inspired by Brewster's work in this particular regard, both as librarian, but also as visionary. In 2015, he wrote an incredible piece called Lock the Web Open, which was then shamelessly stolen by Juan Benet, who is referenced in this week's module, in a talk in Berlin, where we consider what the dream of the web was and where we have landed with it, the things that have been achieved and those which remain to be achieved, those ideas which still wait for their time to come. In particular, we make the arguments this week that locking the web open, that taking back the web, has to do with 3 fundamental pillars. It means reclaiming our ability to think for ourselves. It means reclaiming our time. And it means extending our ability to cooperate. These 3 ideas are realized through an intentional approach to technology, how we make it and how we use it. Both of those are really, really critical. The focus primarily being on what we mean rather than what we achieve, something much more internal, introspective, and reflective rather than achievement or outcome orientated. And that couples nicely with the notion of freedom that we put forward in this particular module. Freedom has many, many different interpretations. We had some beautiful discussions about it yesterday in the Learn Track Yontos. I highly encourage you to watch at least the Nina Simone song in the Freedom module, because it says so much more than I could ever say in words. But what I will say here is that freedom is simply the ability to be conscious of the constraints within which you operate. There are some further words about like that particular idea. The freedom of no escape is how it's sometimes spoken of. And then it is applied to free software, where we look at the GNU Manifesto and the work of Richard Stallman, who's a somewhat controversial figure, but nevertheless highlights three very important things in that manifesto, which have to do with how we think freedom is realized in relationship, both with each other and by virtue of the technologies we use to relate. And those three ideas are that it must be honorable, it must be shareable, it must be hospitable. These three ideas are very interesting to see in a technical manifesto, but they are nevertheless critical. And when we recognize that these are the manifestation of freedom in technological terms that allows us to relate in more wholesome ways that perhaps lead us toward collective wisdom, we can have deeper discussions about the history of tools for thought, how they lead us to an ability to reclaim our time, to be genuinely present, to conspire. To conspire means to breathe together. So to breathe together against some of the oppressive systems we have constructed for ourselves. And in so doing, come to a new humility, right? This piece by Václav Havel at the very end is one of my favorite in the whole module. Humility comes from the word humus, means that shared layer of soil at the top of the forest. That is where all of the decaying matter falls and from where we all draw our nourishment, right? From where all life grows. It's that layer of the earth that is fertile and fecund and that allows for us to grow upwards toward the light so that we may spread our branches and process sunlight such that we can produce food for the rest of the chain and go on in the cycle of ongoing life. So that is a wide framing of taking back the web. There are some much more specific ideas, much less philosophical, in Brewster's piece about locking the web open, which we will get into today. But having set that particular scene, it's with great privilege and excitement that I welcome Brewster, who began the Internet Archive, who has been a visionary of what the web is and could be for longer than I've been working on it, that's for sure. And in particular, the piece that I would like to begin with, we will also be inviting Mai Ishikawa Sutton to join us. She will come in a little bit later. She's on another call right now. And when she does join, I will introduce her because she is unique and wonderful in her own way as well. But in terms of this particular part of the call with Brewster, one of the things which has most excited me about the work out of the Internet Archive recently, and if you're not familiar with them, you may at least have interacted with the Wayback Machine, which is one of their many projects that provides an incredible service to many people looking for information that has, gone out of dates or been removed from the web for various different reasons. And Brewster's work has, in some sense, defined the decentralized web as an effort to break apart all the layers of the current online experience. And it's with this notion that I'd like to begin, Brewster, because breaking apart all the layers, it reminds me of this old Stanley Kunitz poem, which I'd actually like to read in part, because he writes, "Oh, I have made myself a tribe out of my true affections, and my tribe is scattered. How shall the heart be reconciled to its feast of losses? In a rising wind, the manic dust of my friends, those who fell along the way, bitterly stings my face. Yet I turn exulting somewhat, with my will intact to go wherever I need to go, and every stone on the road precious to me. In my darkest night, when the moon was covered, and I roamed through wreckage, a nimbus-clouded voice directed me, live in the layers, not on the litter." So before we get into all of the work that the archive has been doing with DWeb and where the web is headed, as a part of kind of looking back at the history of where we've come from. Brewster, I would love to begin by asking, what have we lost from those early days, and how do you guard yourself against these bitter winds and the cynicism that comes from kind of losing friends? That would be a wonderful place for us to begin.
Gosh, well, thank you. I really appreciate you spending some time together today. I don't want to keep, at this at such a high level that that your philosophical level that it's not actually kind of useful. For me, the dream of the net, the internet, as I sort of set out in 1980 to try to make it happen, was, can we just build that thing that people have been promising for a long time? The Memex, the hypertext of Ted Nelson, what became the dream of the World Wide Web. It just didn't seem that hard. I mean, why aren't we there already? And I'd say some of the lost friends aspect is kind of coming to grips with we're in 2022 and we still don't have the global brain. We don't even have everything online. We don't have a lot of the things that technically were going to be quite easy to do. So why not? And why did we steer so differently? The internet is many things to many people. It's a communication structure, but for some of us, there was this idea of building the library of everything, the Library of Alexandria, available to all, that also thought, right? We were able to weave computers and not just people into the collective knowledge of everybody, and then maybe we could establish something more out of that. I'm not saying that there's going to be a unitary global village where everybody's singing the same camp songs. I think it was going to be a globe of villages where there's interaction, there's building on each other, there's referencing. And how did we try to build all of that? And there's, I don't know, the Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, sort of, everybody draws their different lines. So I'm going to try one myself. The Web 1 world, I think we felt like we were building something together, whether it was through blog posts that were useful. It was more than Usenet, where the posts were ephemeral. We were able to go and make pages, which I think is an interesting conceit that Tim Berners-Lee, he didn't call them posts, he called them pages. And that evokes paper, that evokes books, that evokes library. And it was that vision that I helped build earlier before the web, and then with the web to try to make that vision happen. Web 2 may be thought of as feeds. When did we go from pages to feeds? And when I think of feeds, I think of what you do to horses' faces, and you push them into troughs and say, nah, 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 eat this stuff. And what do we really have to show for a year on Facebook? Really? I mean, have we built Wikipedia pages? No. Have we built blog posts that can be referred to? No. Have we built news pieces that are referenceable? No. We basically have built followers and rage. We're wasting our time. And I think the web is betraying us. The web that we wanted is now become something else that we them kind of a way of and I think that people are interested in building a legacy, building relationships that matter, that and I think we have an opportunity to rebuild the web in this approach, not by going backwards, but by going forwards, by taking advantages of the new technologies, the new structures, the new people that have joined the web and the net since all those days, and build something that's worthy of the time that's being invested. I mean, just think of the billions of hours that are being wasted in some of this just dribble that is just going on. And you say, well, it's kind of, we were always wasting time just talking to each other. But I think we want to build memories, build structure, build culture. And we're fighting against walled culture, where there are those that are trying to proprietarize it. There are those that are trying to make it just a streaming service of nothing on the web. There's counter poses to this that somewhat are based on business models that I think are lacking of insight. So but to answer your question, Andy, of where, how do I try to make sense of it? When I come around to different turns, I kind of go back to, well, I've only really had one idea, which is, can we build a library of everything? Could we build universal access to all knowledge? Could we make it so that anybody wanting to have access to the best knowledge, people, thoughts ever would have access to it? And flip that around and say, you have a place in that world, and you have a way of adding to that in a constructive way. So it's not like actually the world that I grew up in, where the textbooks and the news were handed to you and you felt like you had no way of participating. Can we go and make that dream happen? Technologically, absolutely. And what can we do to try to get to that vision is the sort of guiding light that I have used during my career.
Incredible. The library of everything and universal access to knowledge is certainly something that we will touch on. Before that, I am really, this phrase of yours, not a global village, but a globe of villages, is a really, really interesting one for me, because it seems to touch on how we might enact more participative spaces where people see themselves reflected and feel at home and feel the ability to contribute to and benefit from the world's knowledge. And it's something, if we go back to your 2015 post, that is really, really interesting to me, because it touches on this really deep relationship between distributed systems and local flourishing or local culture. So the quotes that I've pulled from that blog post of yours all those years ago now is that internet service providers, for example, want their users to have a good web experience and would be likely to serve as a close and fast host for their users. This would also help save those companies on bandwidth bills, because more of their traffic would be local. In this way, there can be cultural institutions as well as commercial organizations that have incentive to replicate parts of the distributed web, thus increasing reliability and performance. So as I say, it's really fascinating that these distributed services lead to local incentives and help to both preserve and amplify the relevance of cultural institutions and what we might call like third spaces in healthy civic life. So I'm so fascinated by the push for like distributed global systems, then resulting in a globe of villages rather than a global village. And it's such an important difference that I'd love to hear more on.
So, okay, let me try something. I've been trying this out. I don't know if this works, but so let me use you as a sounding board for it, an arc. So in the paper era, publishers would make copies of books or magazines or newspapers or whatever. These would be bought and read by individuals, and they would be held by libraries. So they would be bought by libraries, and you'd have, even the smallest book maybe had 500 copies, or there'd be thousands of copies, tens of thousands of copies of these things that they would then go and live in a bunch of different places. These libraries, and whether it's our personal libraries or our reflected the community that they were serving. Yes, there were inputs from the outside, but they were organized and manipulated and preserved in a distributed way. So the publishers were free to go off and think about the next thing and put out the next great idea. Terrific. But there's our brains, you can kind of think of ourselves as inside out. I think that's why we have bookshelves in our homes, is to sort of think of our brains, but inside out, right? So you can actually see what it is you've been thinking about over time, and you remember and you can pull it, right? It is your brain. Our libraries did this. Then what happened? And then I'd say there was the mainframe era. The mainframe era was the, well, we don't all have to go and build our own collection of this stuff. Wouldn't it be more efficient if somebody else were to go and pull these things together and digitize this stuff and make it available? And gosh, wouldn't that be terrific? And it was. The LexisNexis, the Westlaw, these sorts of large-scale database systems, what became ProQuest or Elsevier. But it ended up with only one copy, one place, and one organizational structure. And we lost agency. We had terminals that got to see what these mainframe providers did. And that it felt great. It's sort of like the first time you're on Spotify, or remember when you first got Netflix? It's like, wow, look, I can finally get access to this stuff rather than going down a freaking Blockbuster or whatever. But then it sort of lost its, the organizational structure, was supposed to be AI around you, but blah. So we lost something with this mainframe era. The web basically became that again. It was a terminal on somebody else's organizational structure. There's only one copy. The organization that controlled that one copy had enormous levels of power. And it made it yes, they were distributed in the sense that there were lots of different websites or services around them, but it really became kind of any particular thing. The New York Times had only one way to view it, and what they said was all there was. And then you started getting these aggregators to go and make it so that you had to go to these few places, and it was just like, oh my God, I'm in a cage. So then how do we go and get back again? How do we get the agency back to organizations that reflect our values and our people, but are using the resources of all of the rest? And I think there was a concept of Tim O'Reilly's sort of Web 2.0 that was all going to be APIs and it was going to be linked data. And if you've tried to actually get that stuff to work and work over time, it just doesn't. Depending on other corporations to go and keep their services going in any kind of consistent way is just farcical. They just don't do it. So it's difficult to weave any of these things together. We basically have terminals on other people's database products. I think we can go and build a more decentralized system that will serve us better by going and having more agency, whether it's within your browser or within your community, going and having copies of things organized in new and different ways that reflect what you want to do, but still with the power of having all of this information out there, and you can share it non-geographically, so that we can, we're probably all odd birds in our hometown, that we didn't want to just be locked into what the physical environment made for us. So I'm not trying to go backwards. Let's go forwards and add back some of the things that we may have lost based on some of the sort of dopey technology of mainframes or these glass terminals and somebody else's database products, or aggregators like a Twitter or Facebook, which makes me feel like I'm kind of an audience member with I'm in Disneyland. I'm told exactly what it is I'm allowed to do. There's a script done by somebody else of what I'm supposed to be playing a role in. And that doesn't feel like a very good use of the human ingenuity, creativity that we've all got around us.
Yeah, I love that arc. It makes good sense. It reminds me of all of the references to fun in your piece, which we will come to. But there's one other kind of scene setting aspect which is important for me here, based on what you've been saying, is that in this 2015 piece, you draw the distinction between the internet, which is a distributed system, and the web, which is centralized in many of the ways that you've just described here. And in addition to distributed systems advancing or amplifying the relevance of cultural institutions and third spaces, these a globe of villages, the other benefit that comes as a result of having multiple people serve a website simultaneously, and some of the other aspects that you talk about in this post, is that it brings with it almost inherently privacy, right? Because if a website is served from multiple different places, you can't just go to one server and ask for all of the IPs that pinged it and surveil them. You need to do a whole bunch more, and it becomes significantly more difficult. So even just by virtue of the architecture, things become more private. And privacy does relate to our ability to think for ourselves. We have the library in our home, and Vivek and I have a good friend who's not on this call who has a library in his living room where these are the books I like to show to people, and then another little bookshelf in his bedroom, and this is only for the special people, right? If you make it into the bedroom bookshelf, then you've really been let into the inner sanctum, and I think that there's something somewhat delightful about that. And it seems to me that privacy is really critical to our ability to augment our own thinking for ourselves. And what I want to pick your brain on here, Brewster, is that you mentioned the mimics, and Vannevar Bush, As We May Think, is in this week's syllabus, along with Transformative Tools for Thought from Michael Nielsen and Andy Matuszak. And it's fascinating to me because one of the questions I have is, how can privacy and the social uses of knowledge that Bush talks about, these user trails through the mimics, the emergent social use of information as opposed to the kind of top-down library science classification of things. He says that those user trails are so critical to our ability not just to record and store the record of human knowledge, but to consult it. And I'm fascinated by the interface between privacy and the little library in our bedroom that we only want to show to our very, very close friends who we really trust, and the need to have these social user trails that illustrates the use of information current in civilization. How do those two things go together?
Good point. I think there's trustable or institutions and trustable organizations and trustable people are key in this. I mean, in the old days, in your book out of your library, there were these little pieces of paper on the back that said who signed something out, right? And it was fascinating to find, is this a book that nobody cared about, or was this thriving? And who checked it out? And you could look and just go and be able to connect with the people that you shared this book experience with. Can you imagine doing that now? I mean, people would just go freak out because of the abuses of these organizations around privacy. And it is happening. So let's just take something that happened to us, I think it was yesterday or the day before. The Authors Guild put out this press release of being so proud to force Amazon to watch how many pages somebody read of a book, or actually not even read, just flip the pages so that they would count those, so that if they tried to get a return, they tried to return that book for a refund, they couldn't get a refund if they turned too many pages. The Authors Guild was proud of forcing a corporation to spy on all readers to go and try to make some chits for their I don't know, lawyers or whatever the heck they are. It was just dreadful. I mean, we lost the thread, right? That we really need to be able to trust organizations, and we can't even trust these trade organizations that are supposed to be on your side, because they're going to try to cause wrong behavior. These computers can do things that are kind of wrong, and this network structure. And it's happening. So it's not like, oh, there's just, doom and gloom out there. Gosh, Brewster, yeah, thanks very much. The web isn't robust. It's okay. It basically works. Wiley, the scientific publisher, sold a database product of ebooks. It was a package of ebooks to different libraries. And then they just took away 1,200 books from that database product of ebooks, which was, by the way, the only way libraries could get access was by subscribing. They didn't get to own their ebook at all. They didn't get to go, and for the money, they didn't get to buy and own it. Wiley could take it away at any time, and they did. They took away, this was just this last week, 1,200 ebooks just went off of every library's shelf. This doesn't make any sense. It's not robust. The privacy aspect that we've got in the net is being abused, the lack of privacy. So how do we get it back? Because I'm a big believer in Vannevar Bush's. We can't understand the web by just seeing it statically. You have to know where people all went. I started a company called Alexa Internet, which was sold to Amazon in 1999. And yeah, people say, "Oh, you did Alexa?" And I said, "Yeah, but not that Alexa." So it was a organization that cataloged the web by looking at what other people went to. It's people who like this web page liked this web page. It was the first of the massive collaborative filtering things that Amazon, did as part of their buying experience. So we sort of really pushed on the collaborative filtering thing to try to help people navigate what's going on out there based on the anonymized usage trails. But how anonymized? And well, we thought we did a good job of that, both culturally and technologically, to try to make sure that things did stay anonymous. But could you decipher it if you were wanting to? Yeah, you could probably do that. So what prevents it? Well, good behavior, trustable things. The idea we're trying to go towards a trustless society, I think is not a great way to go. We need trust. We need to build trustable organizations, and I think that's somewhat the business model problem. I think in terms of the ontology of you started out this conversation at a very high level. So let me try something else. You don't get to go and say what are the basic branches of plants or knowledge very often, right? Aristotle, got to do this. When the beginning of the internet, John Postel broke up the internet namespace into .com, .edu, .mil, .gov, .org, and it's freaking brilliant, right? I just think about those sorts of why do you need to break things up like that? Why didn't you just have a homogeneous namespace like telephone numbers or something like that? It's these different things. And one of the interesting things about the breakdown of those particular types is they think differently. What's succeeding as a .gov person is very different from succeeding as a .com person. When I wake up as a .org person, a person with a .org at the end of my email address, what life is for, what succeeding means is different. And I think that structure is very indicative. What we've seen is the .com boom. And you say, well, that cratered, but it's like, no, the .com boom is taking over freaking everything. That Class C corporation in the United States is spreading way too far. I'd say money is a great tool, but it's just been over expressed. Whether it's the advertising model, the subscription model, the lock-in you in all sorts of different ways. These business models that we've evolved in the .com world are just not serving us very well. I like the 501c3 structure. It works very well. You can make them operational. They're not just advocacy organizations. I think the work of Wikipedia, the Internet Archive are actually quite interesting structures. So I think there are alternative ways to motivate ourselves to go and build a private, robust, but still a fun environment, inviting. So it's not rule of contract, it's rule of law. Anybody that pays by the protocol, you can join. So protocol is not platform of Mesnick. Mitnick, Mesnick, excuse me. I think are very important paths that we can draw on to build a better web.
I love that. I love that. There's so many threads to draw on in that particular response. We happen to agree about trust and trustlessness, and it forms a big part of module 0 in kernel. Where I want to take that, given the ontological piece, although I see Vivek pausing me for a moment, so I will come back to it.
One important pause would be that Mai has just entered the chat. And so,
Wonderful.
Hi, Mai.
It's lovely to have you. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome.
Sorry for being late.
It's no problem. You're never late. We're always on time around here. So everybody, please meet my Ishikawa Sutton. They are a very important part of the D-Web and have played a really critical role in organizing many of the aspects of it, both the in real life and the online. If you would like to read some of the work with which they have been associated, you can go to Compost. There is a link in the kernel Slack. It's really incredible. This particular edition, Inoculates, is wonderful. And there are vicious rumors on the street of a third edition to come soon. It is served both over IPFS and Hypercore. It is a living example of what collaborative, decentralized websites might look like. And we're so honored to have you with us, Mai. I will come to you in just a moment because I have some questions about fun and joyfulness and subversion, which we can touch on. But just to finish this particular thread with you, Brewster, on privacy, trust, business models, and naming. These 4 things are really, really fascinating to me because you say in this 2015 piece that we've been looking at, this new web could be an inviting system that welcomes people to share their stories and ideas, as well as a technology platform that one can add to and change without having to ask permission, allowing technological change just for the fun of it. The distributed web could also incorporate new naming systems that would exist alongside the DNS to support new approaches to naming and the technologies to support them. This is such a fascinating idea, the notion of both an inviting system that welcomes us into new approaches for naming is, as you have already indicated, an incredibly powerful, almost mythological concept, right? Given that the ability to name stuff across mythologies is a very important part of the human story. And, as it relates to our privacy, in the last sort of technical piece of this is a big part of the blog is about BitTorrent. And, one of the really interesting features of torrent systems is that readers of files become the servers of those files. And so you have this torrent system where if I read a file, I serve it, which helps us create user trails in potentially private manners, especially when we control the way that things are named and use things like content addressability, right? Like if the content that I produce is how things are addressed, and that addressability is then fed into a system that I can participate in creating the naming of in ways that invite the local villagers in my community to contribute, that seems to me like it's just such a compelling vision. and I would love to hear just any other responses on that.
It's just being able to reuse, replay, recontextualize is absolutely critical. It's the only way to make things run. If I think of but what's missing towards being able to do this? Well, addressing content addressability is great. Ted Nelson tried to put forward a mechanism of making it possible for people to make money by publishing on the net. There should be lots of different ways, but just let's go and just spend just a moment on how limited that is. Say you wanted to actually make something, you had an article, you wanted to put it out. You're a rock band, you wanted to put it out. Can you make some of it available for free and then somewhat charge for it? On the internet, no, not really, not without going and putting your stuff on iTunes or Amazon or just, or put it in some PayPal, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't work. So we could, where in the old days, you could make your zine and people would send you $5. And that would be kind of awesome. And you'd get some validation through that. It's all become very centralized. We don't have decentralized money. I think that's one of the great things I think about the whole crypto world is money has an API. Is it going to bring charlatans? Absolutely. Is it going to cause bad behavior? Absolutely. But how do we go and share, reuse, feel good about going and doing this, adding to other people's things without, I think of the iPhone as the definition of closed. I mean, if you want to go and make some addition that's not sanctified by Apple, it's called jailbreaking. I mean, really? Is this where we've gotten to? So we've got a problem out there, but we need a system that is ruled by law, not by contract. You play by the rules that are easy to understand, and your thing works. And that's how the internet itself, the idea of plugging into TCP/IP worked. That's actually the protocol of the World Wide Web. You can just make it available, and then if people can find you, say through a search engine, then you're playing the game. But we now have content moderation structures that are trying to be built into things like the Twitters and Facebooks because of all the problems that we've seen. It's putting those guys in a very awkward position. And it's so I don't say just don't do content moderation, let just Twitter flow. We know how that turned out. It wasn't very good. So we need more participation in shaping our world. Let's have 100 flowers bloom for different ways of forming our communities around these materials, even though they may be the same materials. So that if we don't have to have, I don't know, 10 different messaging apps on our phone. I mean, I remember when before the email, before the @ sign. So when going and bridging between these email systems was a pain in the ass. It didn't work very well. Then we had the @ sign, but now we have, and that was a decentralized system, protocol, not platform. Yet, we wanted to move on. Slack is better, but now it's all kind of centralized into something else. Or Twitter actually seemed better than using Skype and, with multi-group, messages. It just didn't work very well. But then it became too controlled and had a drive and a Class C corporation towards growth, more advertising, more spying, more celebrities, more politicians. Can we have some communities that don't have that in them? And like this kind of group, this is where new ideas happen. These are the bonds that matter. How do we go and make technologies where we living on something? You say, okay, well, this thing is being recorded. Maybe somebody's going to watch it later. Yeah, kind of. Have you? Not very much. So how do you make it so that we're ending up building things together within these? Some it's going to be for free. Some of it's going to be for pay. The old, I think of Cambridge or Oxford as being built out of the monastery model, where they had a wall around themselves and they were a copyright-free zone. And if you're an academic, the crime is not reading, as the current publishers will insist. It's actually not reading. If you were going in and doing and you were going to write a paper on something, you had to go and read everybody else's work on that. It was a copyright-free zone within itself. It worked extremely well until, large corporations started breaking up the publishing model of the universities, which is a serious problem. But we're seeing this over-application of universal control by very few players, destroying communities. Let's open it back up again. Let's have some fun. Let's get some people paid. Let's get materials reused, recontextualized, so that they can be built on. Let's let 100 flowers bloom. Let's get some good ideas coming this next time, and let's not lock out the next new guy that may look different, maybe from a different place, that can come up with the new revolution that overturns whatever it is we think we're going to do for the next 10 years.
Incredible, incredible. My dear friend, it's so wonderful to have you with us. And I have led Brewster into some just incredible and also weedy kind of places with content moderation, trust and trustlessness, the application of business models somewhere between privacy and open collaboration. We've been wandering through some of these really dense topics, and I would love to really alight on the last thing that Brewster was saying there. Let's open it up. Let's have some fun. Let's reuse materials. Let's make sure that we can have small communities of common interest doing stuff together. These tiny little subversions. In kernel, we have this link in module 1 to a presentation given by an incredible designer called Kahle Ko. And she talks about joyfully subverting the status quo. And I know that subverting the status quo is certainly a stated aim of the D-Web. And the way in which you go about that is incredibly principled. These principles that you were a part of making, which include technology for human agency, distributed benefits, mutual respect, humanity, and ecological awareness. They link very, very deeply into what Kahle Ko is talking about in her presentation on joyful subversion, where she says joyful subversion happens through small things, through experimenting with formats, through creating spaces, through minding symbolism, building on history, and shifting the nature of work. So I would love to hear about the small and joyful subversions of your life, especially as it relates to compost, but also if you have some personal stories to share of just little things that subvert the status quo in these beautiful ways. Kahle Ko's example, for instance, is like she knew that they were putting in facial recognition software into MacBooks. And so when they were doing this, she made pink hearts come out of Steve Jobs' head as he was kind of okaying the technology in the meeting. And she couldn't reverse the direction of this particular endeavor within Apple single-handedly, but she could make pink hearts come out of Steve Jobs' face. So I'd love to hear some stories of building compost or little joyful subversions that you've been involved with over the past few years, which are on your heart in this moment.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, and thank you for this conversation. I think a major thread for us with compost and also with the D-Web work with the Internet Archive is, as Brewster said, I think it's really to celebrate each other and celebrate our shared values. I think it's so important for there to be a culture of talking about what's important and what we are trying to build towards. And I think within our overarching economy and our society, it's so easy to sort of everyone get into their own lane, right? And to sort of stress out about your healthcare and your job and your career and, kind of like raising your own or climbing the ladder, right? In your project or in your, in what you're doing. But I think when we make communities where you can see other possibilities and we can have friends and relationships with people who are thinking about the same things and worrying about the same things, you're building, solidarity between people who want to build something better. And, D-Web and the events that we do is really about that. It's, we ground it in the projects and the technologies that people are building. And it's really to kind of like show that there are multiple means for us to build the web that we want, but then also that we need to support each other in doing this, that it's not this competition, that there should be many ideas to address all kinds of different, solutions or problems that people are having. And so Yeah, to answer your question, I think uh, a couple of things stick out. We had DWeb Camp in 2019, and we had Yuri Queiroz, who is from a community network in Brazil, who was speaking to another person. I can't remember the name of the organization right now, but they made locally hosted educational materials that can be offline. And then during the pandemic, because Yuri was connected with Micah, who was a person who worked there, had found out about this, that Yuri was able to offline all these educational materials for his rural community outside Sao Paulo in Brazil, during the pandemic, when educational materials were really hard to come by, schools were shut down and things like that. And it's just like that, just seeing how that one human connection was able to create a whole bunch of opportunities for his community was just, I think it just made me realize the potential of connecting people and building trust within people who are building the tools that address, user, and I hate end user as a term, but that help address community need. What are a couple other things? I think all the work that community networks are doing. I think so. Our fellows program had 25 fellows this year. About half of them were representing community networks where they are building and stewarding that last mile infrastructure of connectivity. And there's so much really interesting sort of innovation experimentation happening there, because that question of like, if you are a community that is, maybe doesn't have access to tap water, or doesn't have access to the normal things we sent, like in urban areas we take for granted, what does it mean to have access to the capital I internet? There's a lot of questions around having more local information that is contextual for the people who are living there. And I think every time that we sort of like play around with that sort of like that assumption of like ubiquitous connectivity, just playing around with that, I think makes for really interesting conversations around like who is stewarding our data, and secondly, how do we make those systems sustainable? And just a moment from DWeb Camp was when all of the fellows were building a community network or a mesh network across the camp, and they were yelling, across the space to say like, oh no, you gotta like, move the antenna here like a little bit to make sure that the line of sight is correct. And like that type of like awareness of like how our networks are built, I think is a really important way to be aware of our infrastructure. And I think the more that we think about that, the ways that our infrastructure is something that people are having to build and having to steward, I think all the conversations that the Internet Archive is doing to talk about, like how it's building out a fiber network across the Bay, how it's how it deals with like scanning particular like LPs and maps and things like that. It's like that grittiness of like the networks that I think like really, really helps sort of like make our networks more tangible and more like appreciated in terms of the care that we need to steward them.
Incredible. One of the ladies who helped, in fact, led the mesh network build at DWeb Camp this year, also happens to be the most incredible singer I have heard in a long time. Esther is just something else, and these kind of surprising moments that occur from one-to-one human connection and the ripple effects that they have through the networks and the technologies that we create were astounding to witness firsthand. And to see her sing La Vie en Rose at a impromptu wedding in the Redwoods, somewhat presided over by Brewster with a Rumi poem, is just really almost too much to bear in one go. But before I hug too much of the speaker, I would really love to hand over to some Q&A now that we've introduced you well, Mai, and it's so good to have you and to hear your perspective. Truly, it's It's just such a privilege. So thank you for at least entertaining me with that one question. And I think if we can get some other voices from the other participants, that would be really, really
Beautiful.
meaningful for me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Brewster. Thank you, Mai. Anyone who has questions, please feel free to raise hands. Leah also has the Slido. I wanted to check with Thomas if you're willing to unmute and ask your question about libraries as a potential place to start. And I'm sure we'll have others chime in soon. Thomas, are you available for that sort of thing?
Hello, sorry, I'm doing my laundry right now, but I just had a question, and that is, should libraries be running IPFS nodes now that the conversation is on storing information and making it accessible?
I think that libraries should have their own collections. They should build. A book is maybe a megabyte, right? So the Library of Congress is 26 million books. 26 million megabytes is 28 terabytes. You can buy that for less than a month's rent. The idea that we don't have tools and we don't have the business models for libraries to have their own collections. So should they be running IPFS nodes? Yeah, they should be writing that and their own web server and. Okay, all you guys, you have your homes, you have your businesses. Why isn't there an antenna on the top of it that's just free and open Wi-Fi? I mean, why not? You guys have, good enough studs around you to go and, firewall things if you wanted to, or you just open it up. And so if we had every library being able to go and store what's happening within their community, that's been a traditional thing that libraries do. But are they doing it now? They don't have the tools? No, they really don't know how to. So is IPFS the breakthrough moment? Maybe. Because that is a very nice peer-to-peer network idea that you read it, you then serve it, you make it more permanent. Love it. Yes, let's do that. But let's also, storage with a J. Let's let a bunch of different flowers bloom, but let's bring it in. Let's re-empower. Libraries are an interesting model, not just because, it's an interesting industry, but it's a $12 billion a year industry. $3 to $4 billion of it goes to publishers' products. It is a socialized support of the publishing infrastructure. In the trade publishing, it's about 20% of the books sold are sold to libraries. But in ebooks, they're not sold anymore. They're just licensed. It's becoming a big problem. There's lawsuits about it, including of the Internet Archive, about trying to make it so the libraries will never own anything ever again. It's a problem. Okay, but let's go back to the more positive comment of what could libraries be. So they're public infrastructure for knowledge and memory, and they have been, they didn't really adapt very well to the internet opportunity. Let's go and do that. But let's not just say, well, that's great, they should do that. It's we should do that. I think of the library as what the internet is. The web is. It's what all of us are building. We have unshackled the library. Think of it as a concept, and we're all participating in building that. We're building other things, whether it's gaming infrastructure, there's other things we're using TCP/IP to do. But one of them is to build a global library of all of us. So how do we go and take what used to, because of the paper problem, was locked into either our bedrooms, our living rooms, or these community libraries. Thank you for Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie, one of the most fierce capitalists ever. He carved into his the Pittsburgh Carnegie Library, free to the people. Doesn't that sound kind of commie to you? Above the door of the Boston Public Library is free to all. Information's different. Information is different from commodities such as wheat or steal or like it's not interchangeable in the same way. So capitalism doesn't really apply as well to information as it does other ways. Anyway, long way of saying yes, they should participate much more, but take the inner library yourself and run it yourself. And I think then we can bring the next Andrew Carnegie, who may be on this call, to build the next generation of whatever public libraries become.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Brewster. We have now some questions trickling in, so maybe we'll go to Mai first for this, but we can see just to continue on the thread of libraries, just to hear, there's one question that came in. If anyone wants to unmute the question around libraries and the web and how much of the problem is about legacy IP law for digital media. Does anyone want to unmute, or should I maybe pass that to Mai and Brewster? Okay, feel free to take it away.
Mai, you want that one, or shall I go?
Yeah, so the question is, is the problem legacy IP law, or to the
how much
extent
of the
that
problem for libraries in the web is that we're using legacy intellectual property law for digital media?
Oh yeah, I mean, like certainly with libraries, right? Having to create a lot of artificial scarcity, particularly around digital material, is very much tied to legacy IP laws, where there's just an entire industry built on limiting knowledge and also not compensating even the creators that are creating that the culture and information that the publishers are even selling right to the libraries. There's a great new book by Rebecca Giblin and Cory Doctorow that just came out called Choke Point Capitalism, and it touches upon this exact issue of the ways in which publishers and the platforms like Spotify, Amazon are gatekeepers of culture, and all of that really affects libraries, that affects the web in the ways that we are able to remix content, even access content. I come from a copyright access to knowledge background at the EFF, and just all the ways that we aren't able to modify our hardware or jailbreak our phones, as Brewster was saying, quote unquote, jailbreak our phone to be able to do anything, to being able to comment and remix, culture that exists like on YouTube. Like there's more and more of these restrictions that exist because of copyright laws. And, we need to have that updated at the same time that we're building these new systems. Compost, for instance, we ensure that all of our works are Creative Commons share alike by licensed, just because we know that since all of that content from Compost will be copied over potentially through IPFS nodes and through Hypercore, and it might just spread all over the place, that we cannot have anything copyrighted because it'll be copied, and that's kind of the goal, right? And so I think the technology of the decentralized web, where things just spread where it wants to go, is just very much inconsistent with copyright as we have it today. And I think that also brings up the question, like, how do we compensate authors well? How do we appreciate them and make sure that they are being paid for their work? And I think that's really connected to the work that libraries are doing, and and the ways that we think about knowledge creation and labor.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mai. I want to go to Charles last, if you're willing, because you have some really related questions in the chat, and then we'll move back to Victor and then anyone else. Charles, please.
Well, thank you, Brewster and Mai. Thank you so much for your work and being who you are. So Brewster, you mentioned Ted Nelson a couple of times, and I wanted to bring in one other key name for me and for many of us here, Doug Engelbart. So in light of sort of their work and your own, obviously, experience, I'm curious about the relationship your view, broad strokes, relationship between repository and community. We're thinking about Doug's term, the dynamic knowledge repository, networked improvement community, and further, how could this inform collaboration? Thanks.
I think it should all be built into one. And I think it was one of the mistakes, one of the shortcomings of the web is it didn't build in a library system at all, right? It had an address structure that was very, very simple that got you to one server, one place that got, you could withdraw something back. And so it didn't have to be that way, but no, the win of the web, it was just simple enough that in Perl, in an afternoon, you could write a web server. So it was an easy enough thing to try to get people involved in, but it's time to move forward. So to make it so that our repositories are living dynamic systems, they're not feeling like stale websites. We had to build the Wayback Machine as a kludge on top of the existing web. And it's still not even woven into the web. I mean, only the Brave browser that if you hit a 404, does it go and try the Wayback Machine? Why didn't Firefox or Chrome do this? I don't know. We're trying to, but they didn't, and they haven't. And we've locked ourselves into a very limited view of how are we building knowledge together. And it's time to break out of it. And we've got the tools, the JavaScript structures, the peer-to-peer protocols within the WebRTC, make it so that we can do peer-to-peer. We can do whole virtual machines inside WASM on your browser. You can run on a Macintosh from 15 years ago at speed in your browser by clicking on something safely and sandboxing, so we can distribute software and code that can communicate with each other. We can build an operating system that evolves more quickly than using the standards committees structures for going and trying to get everything to move in lockstep. So I think we've got tools to go and build new things that we didn't have available to us during the time that Tim Berners-Lee was trying to do the web. We have encryption that's now legal to distribute. It's hard to remember. It wasn't legal to distribute back then. So that was dumb, but it was true. So let's go and build in privacy from the start, but also we can go and sign things and have this content addressability. Content addressability, which Andy, you mentioned, it's magic. It is magic. You can cons from the world just by knowing a string of numbers. You can just ask for it from the world and it comes together and you know you have it for real. That means that you don't have to depend on the provenance of where you got it from. You can get it from anywhere, your neighbor, whatever, and you still know that it's the homepage of Compost Magazine. That is new things that have come about in the last 20, 30 years that we can build a new architecture on and build it to be better, stronger. And I'm so glad, Mai, you're bringing up how do we get people to participate and get paid if that's what they're after? How do we go and do that, or at least acknowledge what they are, what they've done, so that we're building on and accrediting people.
Mai, would you like to add on to that?
No, I'll leave it. I think that was an excellent answer.
Beautiful. Thank you, Brewster. Yes. Beautiful. Okay, so we have Victor and then Lisa.
Okay. So I have a question regarding regarding distribution of knowledge, which sometimes others would consider not to be published. I mean, like if we see like from history, when when the first time that the Bible, which was only Latin, was translated into German, was having such a big backlash regarding that it should not be translated, and also like in a different part of history where we have like, when in 1930, where like books was burned down because like these people were publishing information which is like because they're Jewish, they were like Marxists, or the Chinese Revolution when they decided to destroy like the history of the country, because this is not supposed to learn, because like because like there's a government which doesn't see that, or maybe because I'm from this religion and this should not be published again. How can we make sure that we incentivize like knowledge which is supposed to be published and informed, but also to make sure that, you know, making sure that it should not be destroyed, because like, even though like it's not, you know, the opinion that we want to hear, it's also important that, you know, it has to be shared, that, you know, that this exists, so you can also have like a different opinion. But sometimes we are always afraid to, you know, publish something that we don't know. So how can we make sure that all this knowledge can also be published, but not destroyed as, you know, different parties? Yeah, sorry, this is a bit controversial what I'm saying, but yeah, that was also what I was thinking about distribution of knowledge in some way.
So yeah, the history of libraries is one of destruction, and it tends to be destroyed by the governments, or I think of whether it was king or church back in the day, and now it is government and corporation. So that's what happens to libraries, is they're destroyed. And so you say, well, that's universally bad. Well, it's like, well, yeah, some people say you should, you know, be able to move on. It's that, you know, going and destroying a culture, whether it was the Germans trying to destroy the Jewish culture by going and wiping out all of their libraries in the mid 20th century. Yeah, that's all very horrible. Let's look at it from the flip opposite point of view. When you have a new medium come about, it causes disruptions that are huge. I'm very interested in reading about the Reformation, the first few decades of the 16th century. There was Erasmus, there was Luther, and they were publishing much more freely because they had the printing press now. And they Erasmus had 285 books. 280, how do you have 285 books? It's because they were basically pamphlets that were kind of blog posts. Let's call them blog posts. And then there were these images that were coming out, these broadsides. And it used to be that you had to go to the church to see a picture of the Mother of Christ, and that was very controlled. But now you could go and get these heretical images. That's the Instagram of the day. It caused things to burn. We basically wiped out a lot of monasteries. Lots of people died. It was, and there was Counter-Reformation. There was the Spanish Inquisition. It was a tumultuous time. And some of it was because there was a new medium. With this birthing of the print of digital medium, I think that's some of what we're seeing going through the United States, or whether it's Brazil or Myanmar, that we're seeing a new medium going and upending power structures. You know, I think I have relatives that watch Fox News, and they think it's like news. They think it was like the news they grew up with. It is not at all like the news they grew up with, but it kind of looks like it. So that's why I think we're the idea that all information should be always available to everybody without any seamless barrier, I think can lead to manipulation by extremely powerful players to cause radical upheaval and change, and it's not necessarily what you all want. So I worry when people use the word censorship in a sentence. Usually, all conversation is stopped. Right? They've got, you know. I now sort of know we're talking in black and white land, and there's no nuanced conversation to be had anymore. So, am I pleading that libraries and the Internet Archive not get burned down? Yes. But do I understand that there's an interplay, especially when we have a radical new technology coming around, that we have to be careful and understanding and nuanced about it, and try to have some more gray conversations. Let's live in the gray zone, not just in the black and white zone. It's where truth lives.
Beautiful. I'd like to welcome Liv and maybe Asta, who have been really jiving with this thread, Brewster. Liv, please.
Yeah, so I'm really into the Protestant Reformation just for the sole fact that I feel like it was the first time memes. I mean, memetic culture has been a thing long before, but Martin Luther and the people in the Reformation intentionally created visuals that were printed en masse to communicate with people who couldn't read, because people were kept illiterate as a form of control. And the visuals were like poor farmers pooping in the Pope's hat and farting at the Pope and demons pooping out all the religious people. So it's like really like so close to where it's like what has changed really. But that was the first time really like that, because people were illiterate and the only information they received was from religious leaders. They thought religious leaders were like directly from God and they couldn't be challenged. So seeing this crazy, like, what's the word? Crass representation was like, oh, you know what? I have been treated like crap. I hate these people. Someone else is validating this. Like, let's go. And they nailed it to the door, I think, of the church. I think that's what happened. So it was like really the first time the printing press came into play in terms of like causing a revolution. And there's a really like one of the best podcast episodes I've ever heard is a Bankless episode called The Crypto Renaissance, which talks about Web3 as like sort of, they have a historian who talks about it and as a reflection of the Protestant Reformation and the Renaissance and all that stuff. So I'll put the link to that because that's where I learned about the poutines. So.
But that's funny, history is written by the victors. So we look back on the Reformation as breaking out of the jail of blah, 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 but we don't really focus on just the level of destruction of all the libraries and of the time. That book that I quoted here is The Fragile History is a big tome. There's a shorter little, paper kind of like my Locking the Web Open, which is what can we learn from Hernando Columbus's library. That might be kind of fun. It's two-edged sword, and let's do this revolution well, folks. We can learn from the past. Let's go and do this one without, just burning the hell out of everything in the past and saying we're right.
Yeah.
I guess a question that comes to mind, sorry to chime in, is it even possible, I guess, as someone who spent a lot of time looking at history, and I completely agree. I think if we look at historiography, we know that basically history is written by those who have won. And if we look at the history of the Reformation or any kinds of reformist movements at the time, we know in countries where they haven't been successful, how the story has been told, right? But I guess we have this tendency, or as human beings, as always, destruction, and then, it also brings reconstruction, I guess, or the laying of the ground for a new era. Is it entirely possible that this revolution, if you think about just the transition, if we can call it transition from Web 1 to Web 2 and now potentially Web 3, we're seeing a lot of destruction anyway. So is it even entirely possible to think about a world where destruction doesn't happen, for, I guess, the phoenix to grow and then to come from the ashes?
Amen. Right. This technology is ours to make, right? The people on this call are empowered. You guys are able to be game masters, right? You can go and help define how the game works for the next participants. And, whoever made the dial on the phone round and put the numbers in that order had an enormous amount of control as to how the world worked for a long time afterwards. So making the decisions well that you guys are making right now is incredibly important. And I don't know if it is just, destruction not happening. If there's an evolution, there's a revolution that's going on. But let's build on with this full knowledge and conversations such as this that check and balance ourselves. Check and balance what you're doing. Go to somebody that's willing to go and say, call your bullshit. I find that there are some people in college or high school that are just willing to just call my bullshit. And there's some people, I'm now running an organization. They're not going to be necessarily up for shouting me down inside the organization. So where do you get that input? Find it and lead your lives and your technologies and your organizations well. We really do have the power, probably way more power than we should right now, to go invent a new medium and new structures. Let's do a good job of it. Some of us has blown it in the past, so let's go and do a better job going forward.
And I think right now, yeah, I think in the D-Web space, there's so much of an effort to ensure that there won't be that destruction, or at least on the scale that has been done in the past. And that's, you know, with IPFS or even projects like Starling that is ensuring the provenance of photos and media that is capturing the source of war zones and protest zones. And I think a constant awareness of like, you know, what are we, not only are we archiving, but how are we curating that information, I think is really important. I think for most of us, like we're just bombarded with information, and a lot of it is, I would say, probably not great for us either. You know, like there's so much advertisement, there's so much, you know, like media that is just sort of designed to make us feel bad and to buy more things. And I think thinking about how do we curate things more intentionally so that we are exposing our minds and in dialogue with each other about like what actually matters, how do we solve the problems of our world. I think that issue of curation is going to be a really big one for the decentralized web in the next decade. It's like once we build like what Brewster calls like the sewer pipes, right? Like how do we then create the sinks and the toilets? Like how do we then create the interfaces, you know, with the infrastructure that we're building? And user design and human-centered design is really going to be really key for that, so that more people can participate and contribute to the ways that we are curating and talking about what we are building.
Beautiful. It goes very well with Lisa's question, which we'll return to. It seems like we may not get through them all, but Lisa, please can.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. And thank you for this incredibly energizing discussion and chat. And I don't know about you, but I'm like super amped right now. So thank you. So my question is around this idea of the structures that our minds are operating within. And we talk a lot about re-architecting the internet for everyone or decentralizing it again. And I'm curious, how do you get from this focus on almost rearranging the furniture to seeing the room, and then even more so stepping outside of that room to kind of almost realize you're in a house and build something new, whether it's elsewhere or re-architecting the house? And so curious to hear both of your thoughts on that as we explore shifting our minds outside of just rearranging furniture.
Yeah, I mean, I fundamentally feel like the way that we have that broader perspective is to really think about our organizations. Like, how are we building the tools, and how are we building the technologies, and who is involved in that conversation? I think that's like fundamentally what decentralization is about decentralizing power and decentralizing the stakeholders who are involved in those considerations. And I think if we just continue with the same old way of innovation, where it's like, some person has an idea, they seek capital funding from an investment firm, they then give that ownership to those investors, or exit to a public offering of their stock, stock options, like that part of technological innovation has I think that is what needs to be, disrupted, right? Like there needs to be a lot more ideas around how do we pay people for the labor to build these alternative systems, who are looking at the house, who are looking at the city block more holistically and thinking about the ways we interact and archive our information. And often I think that work is not appreciated, because obviously, I think within the status quo right now, it's actually a lot more profitable to just rearrange the furniture and to just to look at things from a much more uncreative scale. And I think what's really exciting to me are projects like Open Collective, which is just breaking down how people fund projects and how they make budgets transparent within organizations. It's helping hundreds, if not thousands, of mutual aid organizations around the world fund, like very local mutual aid projects. And I think that is the type of project that is actually, in some ways, to me, more important to decentralization than, some of, I'm not going to name any, but like, some of the work around like certain technologies, because like, we have to fundamentally think about the people who are working on this and how they're relating to each other versus just focusing on the tooling. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it really is thinking of like very practically and holistically, like, how do we build things? How do we sustain people building things and maintaining things? And I think that's really, really key.
Thank you, Mai. Let me try it, a complementary part of that, which is, what should we build? I have a piece of homework for you. Please, the next time you're driving around or a shower or sometime you're sort of like dead time, whatever, try this puzzle out. Blank but decentralized. Take something awesome that exists and then try to fill in the sentence blank but decentralized, and try it with all sorts of things, such that it's a piece of technology that ended up being centralized. But what does it even mean to make it decentralized? Fast track is, those things that when you're going through and you don't have to pay tolls. It's kind of awesome, right? But it's centralized. What would be fast track but decentralized? My wife bought a Tesla. It's basically an iPad with wheels. It is awesome, but it's a connected device. They know every time I pump on the brakes. I mean, it's weird. So how do we have Tesla but decentralized? Google Docs, but decentralized. Slack, but decentralized. I guarantee you, if you spend 10 or 15 minutes with any one of these, you will not only start to understand what decentralized means to you, you'll start to come up with ideas of like, well, why did they make it so that that piece of technology ended up so freaking centralized? And it's because it's easier, or like Maya's pointing out, it's easy. It fits our corporate structure. It fits our VC whatever. And that's the wrong answer for building these technologies. So blank but decentralized, I find, is a good mental floss for going and understanding and pulling things apart, just as a way to go. I also posted in the chat I tried to understand, what did Richard Stallman do with this free and open source software? I worked with him back in the early 80s when he was we were giving up on the list machine because it went down, it got forked, so he came back and said, okay, well, we lost that better operating system, let's go make a trashy operating system called Unix, which is, of course, is a joke for being a Unix. It's a crappy operating system. But he said the key thing was the license. What was that idea, and how do we apply that idea to more things? So that little blog, in these little papers that I do kind of every year, Locking the Web Open was one, that the Hernando Columbus is another, this free and open source societies is another. But I think it goes back to Mai's, like, how do we go and organize ourselves to make systems where we have games with many winners. We're taught in the VC MBA world crap that the United States has got addicted to, that you want to be the winner. It's like, let's think more like game masters. Let's make games with many winners. And if you do that, you can be a winner too. But it doesn't have to be one against all. Let's build systems, and they're more fun, they're more interesting to play in. It makes a more graceful thing to put on your tombstone than this guy made a lot of money. It's like, whoopee. So how do we go and make technologies that serve all of us on a going forward?
Mai and Brewster, thank you so very much. I know that we have reached 1/2 the hour, and I really would love to respect your time. You've been with us and so generous with your time, and we are just deeply, deeply grateful for both of your presence. The insight, the experience, the perspective that you share is truly valuable. I wish you continued joy, continued fun, continued ways of finding graceful things to put on your tombstone. All of these are wonderful reflections, and it's just been an incredible conversation. So thank you so very, very much for everything you have shared with us. We look forward to continuing to collaborate across the distributed web and finding new and interesting ways of acknowledging people, making sure they get due recompense, making sure that we can build systems which do preserve privacy but are nevertheless fun, which adhere to some of the higher visions of what universal access can mean and what an open library might do for our own memory, for our collective memory, for the ways in which we share what it means to live and what it means to live well together. Thank you very, very, very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for your work, truly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, all.
Go well.
Great crew.